themselves Swiss brethren. So it was a pejorative term, and they never used it themselves. I used to say, I had this, well, low-key campaign going to say, we're not Anabaptists. We're Mennonites, brethren, Amish, Hutterite. We're descended of the Anabaptists, but we ourselves are not Anabaptist because they don't exist. And then the seminary dealt the final blow to my argument. They named themselves Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary. I lost the battle again. And so at this point, these proto-Anabaptists, I'll call them the Grebel Circle, were criminalized. Everything they did and everything they said was now illegal.
On? Yeah. So is a couple quick questions, hopefully. Is there an understanding why Zwingli changed? And is also, were there numbers with the radicals? Like, we know the three, there's 4 or 5 listed, but were there a bunch of, like, you're talking about the autonomy of the preaching or the autonomy of churches, but were there enough leaders for these churches around?
Yes, there were, and I'll talk a bit more about that. And I also speculate who was present at the first baptism. So there were other leaders equally important. They just didn't get their faces painted on a portrait. That was Arnold Cressman's project from Laurelville Mennonite Church Center. And so he got the models. And so every time I look at Conrad Grebel, I see John Ruth. Every time I see George Boirock, I see Leroy Alderfer. And every time I see Felix Muntz, I see Tim Clemens. Now that's a handicap. I wish it weren't that way, but so it is. They didn't ask me.
And Zwingli's change?
I'm sorry?
Zwingli's change?
Yes, because increasingly he was discovering how difficult it would be to lead a free church apart from the city council. Where would be his support? Where would be his protection? Who would lead them into war? So he became very practical and said, we can't do it without the city council. We can't do it without the city council, yeah. And so by this time, he became very pragmatic. And when the Grebel Circle kept pushing for a free church, he said, yeah, you guys can go off and do your own thing, but I am responsible for the masses, for everybody in the city. And one of the critiques was that there were debates later where Mennonites complained that Zwingli let anybody around the Lord's table. He let everybody take communion, participate in the Eucharist, saint and sinner alike. And the Anabaptists, of course, were very clear about the covenant community. You made a covenant with your community, and that was your basis of authority. Yeah, so Zwingli gave it up, and it's only, and it was here, let me see, what do I have? Yeah. So it's only here that this break became apparent. And they were talking about this reform. And so the proto-Anabaptists said, okay, you say you're going to do the reform. When? Well, Zwingli said, the city council will decide. Oh, that was the breaking point. All the Grebel Circle was gone. They said the state does not rule the church. Jesus, Christ rules the church, not the state. And so they suffered the consequences. And I'll say more about not having the protection of the sword. Okay. I'd really like to go on. Can you help me out? Oh, got it. Okay, so here's my second lecture for the day. The Kettle beginning in 1516, when Erasmus publishes his new translation from the Hebrew and the Greek. And Luther posts his 95 Theses in 1517. Zwingli comes to town in 1519 with his own theses, 67 of them. Then there was the sausage stunt, this meal during Lent. Then we had the first of 3 debates beginning in 1523. And the final debate leads to criminalization and to the first baptism on Neustadt, Gaza. Well, this summer, I boiled quite a bit of sweet corn. And I was thinking about this, the Zurich turmoil. And I disproved the adage that a watched kettle never boils. It does, because I watched it multiple times, thinking of Zurich and how things were bubbling up in Zurich. So don't believe that a watched kettle never boils. Oh, how did we get here? I have nothing to say about this slide. I don't know it. I don't recognize it. Oh, there's a cave there. Maybe that's where the Anabaptists hid on the Pacific coast.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I'm assuming that in all of those debates, there were no women present.
You're most likely right, but not necessarily so.
Okay, I was just curious.
When we get to the first baptism,
Okay.
we have women, at least one. Okay.
She has it here.
There was a power surge.
I didn't think I was that charismatic.
You're electric.
By the way, in the interim, let me tell you another story that I didn't tell you last night. Elvin Herr was a kind-hearted deacon, I think from Willow Street or East Petersburg. You know these places.
I knew him.
Did you? You knew Elvin Herr?
Yes. My husband and I raised his...
Oh, can we have a mic?
Oh, right here. Here, this.
There's a lot of people. Well, I do know him. I did know him well when he was living. My husband and I raised his grandson, who was left orphaned by his parents, who died, was my husband's brother, Paul Stoll, and his wife, Her was her maiden name, Lois Herr, were his parents. It was Peter Ned Stoll was his name, and Elvin was his grandfather. So I knew him from the time Peter was 13, and he came to our family. Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah, he didn't have any brothers or sisters. He
Elvin
was an
died
only
about-
child.
About when?
1965.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I heard this delightful story about
so-
Elvin,
Yeah.
who hauled products, was it potatoes, to Philadelphia for the market. And he was in the habit of picking up hitchhikers. I used to do that too, until I married. Then the person I married just wasn't into picking up hitchhikers. So one time he picked up 2 guys who were studying for the priesthood at Villanova. And they got into discussions, as he always prompted. And they talked about nonviolence. Non-resistance was the term in those days. And these 2 guys said, that's just not, you can't do that. If you live in a country, you've got to defend it. Well, Elvin said, okay, you know that the Bible clearly says when we greet each other, we should greet each other with a holy kiss. So when you meet your opponent on the battlefield and you recognize him as a fellow Christian, do you kiss first and then bayonet each other? Or do you bayonet each other and then kiss?
Made his point.
He made his point, yes he did. I love that. Okay, so back to the cave. Anabaptists were known to hide in there. By the way, since I don't have anything about the Anabaptist cave, the Teufelhöhle, how many have been to the Anabaptist cave, Teufelhöhle, northeast of Zurich? Well, the man who discovered this cave and introduced the rest of us said a family had been staying there. And over the years, that story got changed to a secret meeting place. So here we have two stories about the same thing. So I tell them both, and you can decide.
You want to tell people what the Anabaptist cave was? I mean, people might not know.
Aha, yeah, sorry, I take too much for granted sometimes. Up in the hills at Beretsville, beyond Zurich, still in Zurich Canton, there is a cave that is called the Anabaptist Cave, Teufelhöhle, where it was confirmed that Anabaptists had used it. And so ever after that, that became a stopping point on Wilmer's tours. Didn't you always go there?
Always went there, or the one at Yoder Cave.
Have you been to Yoder Cave?
Pardon?
You've been to Yoder Cave?
Oh, many times.
Huh.
It depends on the schedule, so. Or the one up in France as well, of the bridge.
Yeah, yeah.
Times and stop there.
Where's the mic?
Oh, yeah, I'm not doing my duty. So there's a cave northeast of Zurich that is known as the Anabaptist Cave because Anabaptists had used it. And that's been confirmed by neighbors and by the Reformed Church. And so it's a good stop. And since 2007, they have created a wider path. When we got there, there were refreshments. There was fruit and drink at the bottom before we got up, and when we came back. So the Reformed Church really accommodated us. And I didn't say that the Reformed Church gave to us, the Mennonite World Conference, the use of any public buildings in the city for no charge. They were very gracious. Okay. Oh, Claritin D. Well, anybody have some? I think I could use it.
John, while we're waiting, I'm particularly curious about this idea of basically what they were looking for was closed communion in the beginning, and we've gone to the other extreme now with open communion. We ask no questions or anything. How did we get from that in 1525 to where we are today, that we're comfortable with an open communion among most of us?
Okay, so you do that here. Wow. Stan, what are you teaching these people?
Oh, it's long before Stan. And don't tell me your congregation has closed communion.
Well, I think it started in the 60s as a rebellion against our authorities, our authoritative bishops, who were usually kind and gentle and hated to do discipline but were forced to. But the ones that we remembered were the harsh ones who made demands and mandates. Well, we got farther and farther away from our own tradition. See, we broke from Zurich, 1525, 1960s.
We're back.
Here we are.
We're back.
Thank you, whoever is the miracle worker. So we became more congregational. We make our own choices. We, like the people in Zurich, don't want to be governed. We want to go by our convictions. Now, Carl, you've seen this transition. Do you have anything to add? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this leads to the first baptism on Neustadt, Gaza Alley. Here. Neustadt, Gaza. On the left is my son MJ, who was with me in 2003 in Zurich. He was studying German with Urbig Glick in Austria, and then he hitchhiked around the country. And by the time we met, he was so hungry and so eager for a bed that he was actually glad to see me. Here is the fountain from which the water was drawn for that first baptism. The fountain in this form still exists. So this is kind of the Holy of Holies. In spite of somebody else, JB, did you talk about Holy of Holies somewhere else?
I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, what was that place?
Aspirin. Aspirin.
Well, that's true too. So we have two of them. So here, the night of January 21, 15 people, we don't know how many, were walking through the streets of Zurich after dark and found their way to this house. This house is still owned by the church. And they've had clergy and other people staying there who were in their employ. So I kept looking at the sign on this door and noticing that it was owned by the church and was since the 1300s. So I said, Peter Detweiler, isn't this the place? Well, he said, I think so. And then when Ernst Loy, the famed archivist of Zurich, confirmed it or agreed with it, I said, okay, I'm free to tell the story now. So I think it was a house at this location. And the water still flows, which makes it kind of amazing for us. So the story is that these 12 or 15 people walked through the streets and alleys and came to this house, probably in a different form. And Anna Mantz was living there, and she opened the door, and they came in. And they sat in a circle in Anna's place, Anna's house, and decided what to do. They had just been made criminals. What are we going to do? Is it worth giving our lives? It was a very serious meeting. And they decided, well, they need to pray for guidance. So they knelt on their chairs. When they got back up, Georg Blaurock had decided what he wanted to do. Now, I've called him the Simon Peter of the Anabaptists because he spoke freely and loudly sometimes, whether it was appropriate or not. So he went over to Conrad Grebel, the acknowledged leader of this group, knelt down and said, Conrad, baptize me with true baptism. So I think Anna brought a dipper and a pail, and Conrad Grebel baptized Georg Blaurock. Well, the earth stopped turning here because something revolutionary was happening. This hadn't happened before. He had to be ordained and enter the priesthood and have the imprimatur, the approval of the system. Well, when he was baptized, I wonder what people were thinking. He was convinced. We're not going to turn back. Let's do this thing. And so then Blaurock baptized everybody else in the room. And this small beginning is what started the Anabaptist movement that has produced Hutterites and Amish and Mennonites and all of us. Nobody would have put any money on whether this would succeed because it was bound to fail, because they would be under the sword. They would be persecuted, and they knew it. I assume you can read the text. See, this is more than baptism. What did baptism symbolize? It symbolized, in this case, a new movement that shook the earth. It broke a 1,000-year tradition of church-state union, this blending of cross and sword that had been since Constantine. Well, I say Theodosius, and we'll get to that. So the new church would be without national boundaries, without political lords, and without the sword's protection. They were really launching something new here. And they knew their lives would be harassed. They would be harassed. But they did it anyway. That's why we're here. So far more than baptism. It was never really about baptism, although this became the symbol of the new church. But it was not about mode of baptism or when to baptize. That was beside the point. It was only the surface issue. It was the break with the state that produced Anabaptists. It's interesting to say that now, since there is a, a growing support for church-state collusion again. Christian nationalism. What? Did the Anabaptists die in vain? Apparently. So there must be a witness to the importance of the separation of church and state. I read people's posts. I have family members who say the church was always included. Nobody had the idea of separation of church and state. That's a myth. So if you think that, I would advise you to research Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson demanded the separation of church and state, as did all the founding fathers. It may have happened sooner had there been founding mothers as well, but it was the guys who did this. They had seen too many religious wars in Europe. 30 Years' War, 100 Years' War, they were always fighting. And often it started about religion. So you had the Catholics fighting the Lutherans and the Lutherans fighting the Reformed. It was chaos. And so, one cannot, and then Thomas Jefferson, later in life, got 4 Bibles in 4 different languages. And he cut out the parts he didn't like. Anything to do with divinity of Jesus, miracles of Jesus, all that he cut out. And created his own Jefferson Bible, which you can see at the Smithsonian. So now, did he advocate church and state? Union? Did he think we were a Christian nation? No. No, no, no. If you wonder about that, I wrote an article for Anabaptist World in the January issue, commemorative issue, last year on church and state. So, if you want more, you can go there, if you trust my judgment. Okay, so here's history. In 313, Constantine wanted to be emperor of all of Rome. And he, at the Milvian Bridge, just outside of Rome, the story is that he saw a vision and heard a voice saying, "By this sign conquer." Oh, now here's a religious tradition that can help me win the war. Their God can help me win this war. Well, he won, although there were 2 emperors for a while. But because of this vision, as the story goes, he legalized Christianity, saying, if the Christian God helped me win the throne, then of course they should be allowed to exist. But he did not legislate Christianity. That came in 380 with Emperor Theodosius, who mandated Christianity as the official church religion, the state religion. So now we were tied together. And from here until the 15th century, that's the way the world worked. Anabaptists had a vision for separation, for a church free from the state and the control of the state and its protection, as you know. So Theodosius really is the bad guy. We Anabaptist historians who think we are historians, say that. For most historians of other traditions, say this was the triumph of the church. Now the church had something. Now the church could gain wealth and influence and think what we can do in the world. Yeah. Well, what they did was act like everybody else, every other state. So if Christianity is the only option, how do you do mission work? Well, you send your armies into a Muslim territory and conquer them. How do you read the Sermon on the Mount if you have an empire to manage? Well, it didn't fit. Jesus didn't fit, so they went to the Old Testament. And there we had all kinds of stories about theocracy, church and state together. So what state? Sometimes in my classes I have had students who insisted this was a Christian nation. I said, okay, tell me when the nation acted like Jesus and forgave its enemies. What does Jesus have to do with it? There's my point. So in Zurich, you have this reformer, Orie O, who had the support of the town council, city council, both councils. And you had these radicals, the Grebel Circle, that studied the Bible with Zwingli. Conrad Grebel, a failed university student, failed 3 universities because he was not a serious student. In the last university, Paris, I think he was kicked out because he was involved in a street brawl and somebody was killed in this brawl. Well, does that sound like a reformer that you want to follow? He came to Zurich and he was truly revolutionized. He was truly reformed by the teaching of the gospel under Zwingli. So you can read history in a number of ways. One is the Harold Bender version of the 1940s, where there was a straight line from the real reformers, these 3 and their cohorts, to the Mennonite Church today. Well, he was very soon challenged by the next generation of scholars who said, oh, you've got to consider the social context, the political context, what else was happening in Europe. You can't draw this straight line because we've had many Anabaptists, all the way from the rebellious Anabaptists of Munster, who took over the city and battled the bishop's armies for 3 years. And on the other side, you had spiritualists like Hans Denk, who thought outward ceremonies were not important. He preached about the inner word, apart from the outer word. So these scholars are saying, you have to take them all. They're all Anabaptists. And there are still, well, the more traditional wing of the church that still tells the story this way. And the Peasants' War is another bone of contention. Let's see. Okay. Let's go back to the first baptism. We've always wanted to know who was there. Well, we know 3, 4 Anamans was the hostess, but these were leaders of the Zurich turmoil and the watching kettle boiling over. So they must have been there. I can't prove it, but they were so involved that they surely were present, I say. Well, I say maybe, because I can't prove it. Okay, On a month, of course, Andreas Kasselberger. Kasselberger was a bookseller. He hosted a Bible study in his house, and he went all over the country selling books. So he came in contact with many, many people and was a proponent of the Anabaptist gospel. Simon Stumpf, a pastor, an activist nearby. Margaret Huttinger was an activist and lay leader. Agnes Link, also a lay leader and activist. Wilhelm Reublin, who was a pastor who preached against tithes, who preached against infant baptism. Heine Auberly, a baker, who, by the way, had his own sausage affair when he served his guests steak, a roast, on a Friday before. That doesn't get much press, but he was there. So surely he would have been here. Hans Ockenfuss, a tailor. Wolf Inninger, a cabinet maker. Klaus Hottinger, a salt merchant. Lorenz Hochhutner, a weaver. Jacob Hottinger, village pastor. Johannes Brotley, also a village pastor. These were movers and shakers. They surely were there. If not, they were baptized shortly thereafter. Jacob Hottinger was kind of a hothead. He was a little bit like Simon Peter, too. He said of Zwingli's preaching, "It's like standing behind a cow with loose bowels when Zwingli preaches." He used earthier language than I did. That's how much respect he had for Zwingli. Okay, any comments, observations, questions? Right after this, there was a revival in Zolikan, about an hour's walk from Zurich City. Sometimes we visit there. So, of course, the Grebel Circle scattered. They preached Zwingli's gospel of liberation and peace. They sought to renew the church, economics, society. 35 were baptized in that next week in Zolikan. 200 met as a church without walls, they called it. 20% of the village constituted the first church of the Swiss Reformation. Part of the effectiveness of this reform was bringing the church into the homes of people. So there was intimate participation rather than this distance from the priest, which was the old way. And what was so appealing for many was the integration of preaching and living. People hadn't seen that, and they were drawn to it. So the watch kettle has now boiled, run over, and created other pots with boiling water. All right, well, are we done?
Time for Q&A.
Okay, that means I have to quit?
Keep going for another 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay. Well, let me just say something about this. So Anabaptism went everywhere. Persecution scattered this Grebel circle, and they went everywhere, preaching this gospel of liberation. Personal renewal, liberation, freedom from state control. Man, people loved it, which is why so many were won to Anabaptism around Zurich and beyond in Switzerland. As you see, Moravia, Waldshut is Germany, Cologne, Augsburg, Flanders, Belgium, Amsterdam, Friesland. So it went all over. The suppression was a very effective missionary mandate. I sometimes say this. I'll say more about this Sunday morning and why the Anabaptists had a different vision. Where did they get this vision of the church? without the state. Okay, Q&A. Rich, up here. JB, up here.
So we know Menno Simons was a Catholic priest. Were there Catholic priests in Zurich who had a lot of Catholics there? Were they part of this reform movement at all, or?
Well, 10% of the population of Zurich were clergy, was clergy. So, yeah, Catholicism was strong there until Zwingli's Reformation. And the Reformation went from Zurich to Bern. So the canton of Bern, canton of Zurich, and a few others, 7, became reformed. Everything else stayed Catholic. So you could find your Catholic church in the next canton if there wasn't one where you were living.
No, I was asking though whether priests, like Menno became a
Yes.
Anabaptist.
Yes.
Did priests in Zurich become part of the reform movement?
Yes. Johannes Brotli was one. There were a number. So yes, they did. They saw this new way of thinking, and they imagined a church free from the state. So yes, they did.
John, your last slide here is pretty powerful, and I'm thinking about that for the previous slide where you said Anabaptists went everywhere. Was that because of persecution or because those people were paying so much attention to Jesus?
Yes. The only way to answer that is yes.
From the perspective of theology, how do you compare their basic theology to, let's say, fundamentalist evangelical Christianity today?
Well, much of the evangelical world is cozying up to the state, cozying up to our current administration. Where's their witness? I don't see it. So there are others with our theology and beliefs and practices, but the evangelical world has drifted. Do you have more to say?
I have the impression many times that your fundamentalist evangelical approach is totally the focus on being saved to go to heaven, and the broader message of Jesus is not a part of that. So give me a perspective from the Anabaptist view to where that thought is
Well
today.
said. We had a coach at Hesston College, basketball coach, who went all over the place speaking. He had a gift of oratory, which reminds me of C.F. Durstein stories, but I don't have time for that. C.F. Durstein stole my thought. What was the...
Basketball coach.
Oh, the coach, yes. Well, he would always preach a strong salvation sermon, and all of his guys were saved and baptized. Well, I don't know if they were baptized. After one of his speeches, I just said, so what happens after the cross? He said, I never thought about it. That's the difference. Anabaptists look beyond the cross to see the results of it, to see the mission and the harmony, and Jesus' teachings applied. That made all the difference. So many people think of Jesus as maybe an action figure. We look to the cross to be saved, and then it doesn't matter what we do. Or they join a right-wing movement and cozy up to the state and our current administration and think that's Christianity. It's a terrible witness for Christianity, got to tell you. So the Anabaptists offered an alternative that we still have, but we often don't want to talk about it too much because we don't want our neighbors to criticize us. We don't want our family members to be hard on us. It's a different message. It's a message this world needs desperately. Okay, either one.
The people in my group that argue against what I say and what you're saying say, well, it says in the Bible, in the New Testament, Christians are to take dominion. And they have a completely different translation of what dominion means. It's what I think it means in the New Testament.
Dominion comes from creation, the Old Testament, the story of creation, and man was created to have dominion over the rest of the beings. That's not Jesus. And we're pretty safe if we go to Jesus, because most Christians won't argue against Jesus. Now, they'll argue that he really didn't mean what he said on the Sermon on the Mount. He wouldn't apply that to us because we live in a different world. You just can't live that way in 2026. So it's still a valid witness if we will use it.
And dispensationalism.
Sensationalism. Yeah, there wasn't much with the Anabaptists about that, except when they were executed, then the people gathered around to watch. Oh, dispensationalism. I misheard you. We have been fed a bill of goods by John Darby, the 1860s, who said the Bible and the eras are different. So God has 7 different ultimate wills, not one, but 7, or some say 9. And in each text, God's will is different. So it's a way of categorizing Scripture in places that you don't have to mind it. So in this system, the Sermon on the Mount can't be lived today. Come on. That's for the millennium to come. When Jesus rules on earth for 1,000 years, then we can live that way. We were sold a bill of goods. I was raised with that theology. I can tell a short story to illustrate it. I was a Hesston College freshman. I was preparing for a Bible study I was leading with a local church's junior MYF. I was in the library preparing for the next session. And a friend came up and said, "What are you doing?" Well, I told him all this about Israel being redeemed, and Israel really is God's people, and the church is kind of in a holding pattern, and he stopped me with one question. Where does that leave me? I'm a Palestinian Christian. I had no words. But I went back to the books, different books, did some wider reading, and became convinced that's just so wrong. I had another article in the Anabaptist World talking about Israel as a chosen nation. I said, the only way you can support Israel's actions these days against the Palestinians is by ignoring 400 years of context in the Old Testament, 400 years of context until the state of Israel was formed. You can't draw a straight line because the Israel then was not considered, well, became a state, but the word for nation is people. They became a people, God's people, not a nation state. You read the story, you see what happens when they insist on becoming a nation state. Well, they get punished. They got taken into exile. So again, context is everything. Yes?
I like a lot of what you've said, so.
But, is there a but coming?
There is a but coming. I think we need to be careful not to caricature the evangelicals. There are strong evangelical churches that also do social justice work, that do care for the poor and so forth. And I just don't want us to forget that. Fortunately, a lot of that work sounds like Anabaptists. And I think that we should feel happy about that and embrace our evangelical siblings who are actually quite close to where we are in many ways.
I hear you.
Yeah, my cousin is an evangelical, and
Maybe a good kind.
she's just amazing. I'm not going to say that she does not lean, into what Christian nationalists do. I'm not going to say that. My grandfather was an evangelical minister. I was raised Episcopalian, but because I was, because my mother wouldn't let me be baptized until I was 12. That was just how it happened. So somehow this weird blend lands me here, which I'm grateful for. And I just, I think about my whole family and those, the wonderful things that they do and who they are, and I just kind of agree on some levels that, even though I have to say that one of the reasons why I'm here is because of what I can very strongly say damage that was caused because of my evangelical roots, and the way I view things. So this is a powerful conversation, and I'm grateful for it. I don't have a question. I just wanted to
You gave
chip
your
in.
testimony. Thank you.
I just wanted to chip in.
And my comment along that line is, I'm just amazed at this church, and I'm so thankful, because I think we're right. I think we're really right.
So why doesn't everybody else learn from you?
Apart from the pastor.
John, I'm wondering if there isn't confusion between evangelical and fundamentalism.
Yeah.
The word evangelical in and of itself is really what we should be.
It's good news.
And what we're hearing is these harmful things that primarily comes out of fundamentalism. And the Amish have it, the conservative Mennonites have it, we have it to a certain extent here, and it's damaging in many cases. Evangelical, I mean, one of the songs we sing in this book that was written by Menno Simons, pure evangelical faith, for heaven's sakes.
Sure.
And I'm really feeling like we don't want to use the word evangelical when we should be using fundamentalism.
Well, there are two different things, but I agree with you, essentially. Fundamentalism appeals to a lot of people because it gives you answers. It gives you one answer for every question. And you're not welcome to ask questions beyond that, in most cases. Now, it's the evangelical wing and fundamentalists who have gone to the right politically and theologically that create dilemmas for us. Oh, I found the clock.
So I know Stan's going to close here, but also, okay, so in preparation for this about a year ago, and John mentioned this, was that Anabaptist World put out a commemorative issue, and we got 15 copies specifically for this event to be given away to you all. So they're over here on the counter, including John's article about Christian nationalism and such. So you're welcome to take one per family, probably. If you don't have it, some of you may already have this because you're subscribers. But please do take them. They're very, very. It's a wonderful issue of Anabaptist World. So.
Thank you, John. This was informative, challenging, so on and so forth. And I hope you can rest the rest of the day. But we look forward to tomorrow morning. Your story about MJ, and I hope that you can all come and join us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I do want to say thank you to Renee. She's been helpful putting the coffee out and pulling all those kind of things together. And so, okay, yes, it's one of your gifts anyway. So thank you all for coming out Saturday morning. You got the rest of the day, and I think this has been a good morning. I mean, I think that has been very informative. And, JB and John, thank you for hosting, John and Michele. And you guys have the gift of hospitality. You just kind of show them where the pots and the pans are and let them do their thing, from what I understand. But I think that your relaxed nature is also very important as we welcome guests into our community. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. It's a beautiful day out there. Pray for Kathy and me. We're supposed to fly back to Pennsylvania on Monday. I'm not sure we're going to make it. So we may be staying with you a few more days. So have a great day.
I'm not sure what happened to the